Welcome, Kiki and Adam, to the podcast. Thank you so much for both being here. You guys have three children. You've got Hayden, who's 11, and Heidi's 5, and you've got a little newborn, Lara, who's 6 weeks old now. Yeah, and it's quite the story, her coming into the world. And I thought we might start this conversation tonight with yeah, I first met you, Kiki, when you came along to a talk that I gave. I was invited to give on birth trauma. So I thought we could start this conversation with you sharing about why you came along to that talk.
Yeah, so I sort of came to that talk quite randomly. We had Naomi Ruth in at work, and she mentioned that she had you coming along to speak about healing birth trauma. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. I will just go along for work purposes.
Ah, do you want to let us know what you do for work?
Yeah. So I work for the Village NZ, which is a not-for-profit organisation that is all about having the village to raise the child and finding ways to support mums and parents, caregivers with babies and children from all the way from pregnancy right through. And they offer like online and in-person education events, classes, courses, all for free, all accessible. And yeah, I do the social media side of it, and obviously not now because I'm on maternity leave, but yeah, it's just a really awesome organization to be a part of that's really supporting Kiwi parents in this journey, which you need the village very much so.
So you thought you'd come along to a talk on healing after traumatic birth, because it might add to your kete of knowledge in order to support other mums. And you were like 20 something weeks pregnant with Lara at that stage, I think.
Yeah, I think I was around about that because I had gone back for my I'd gone back for the second round of anatomy scan because they hadn't got all the views they wanted. So yeah, um, that would have been about right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at the time I wasn't. I knew I had a bit of sadness around those two previous births, but I didn't really realize that it was trauma, which I think is important to say because not a lot of women who experience birth trauma will often identify it as that.
Mhm.
And I was the same. So, and then when I went to your talk and you were talking about the kind of work that you do, and even before we started the talk and you introduced yourself to me and I told you a bit about my story, it was like all of a sudden you just allowed this space for all this emotion to come up. And I realized then that I was like, oh my God, like I have birth trauma and this is no joke. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I was like, something made me come to this other than for work, and it was a bit of an outpouring for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my recollection as well. I remember you getting quite emotional and saying that you wanted a home birth, that you wanted a home birth, and you didn't know, I think, at that point in the piece that you had the support to be able to do that. Or maybe it was even new to your mind at that stage that you wanted a home birth. I'm not sure. But I sent you away with a copy of my book, Where the Heart Is. Yeah, stories of home birth in New Zealand, and yeah, we kind of formed a bit of a relationship after that. But we'll come back to that. Let's rewind to sharing with the listeners about your birth experiences with Hayden and with Heidi.
Yeah. So both Hayden and Heidi uh, were born in Australia in Newcastle, and I don't know if anyone out there listening is familiar with the Australian maternity system and how it works, but it's very, very medicalized, and um, there isn't actually an option to have continuity of care or a lead maternity carer outside of the hospital. If like that, I think that's starting to change now, but at the time, you go into the hospital for your antenatal appointments and you get a different midwife every single time. And if you're paying privately, which I wasn't, but if you are, you go into the private hospital, see the private obstetrician, see the private midwife or midwives. I still don't think you get continuity of care with the private aspect of it either. And then, so you see a different midwife every time. And then when you birth, you go into the hospital, you get a different midwife, whoever's on shift, you get a different obstetrician unless you're private. So it's very much, no one knows you, no one knows your story, no one knows your pregnancy. You're a number. And so when I fell pregnant in Australia, that was just what I knew to be the way it was. And I didn't question it, and I didn't look into it, and I didn't have any idea that there was other ways of doing it. Call me naive, but at the time, all of our friends around us were doing the same thing, and it's just what you did, and no one talked about it, and no one questioned it. Which, looking back, is kind of sad, you know. And I'm actually starting to have conversations now with our friends back in Australia about their births and about their birth trauma, and they didn't realize the same thing as well. So it's quite a situation over there, which is really sad for women, and hopefully it's starting to turn a corner now, because it's in a dire state. But so I had a really uneventful pregnancy with Hayden, and then when I went into labour naturally by myself at, I think it was like 41 and maybe 6, I laboured at home for like a day or so, and managed to get to 4 centimetres dilated, which now I know doesn't really matter anyway. But I managed to do that by myself, and relatively easily as well. And then we got to the point where things were starting to ramp up, and as you're advised in antenatal class, is ring the hospital and they'll, direct you as to what to do. But only ring the hospital if you've got the contractions at the, the certified sort of time frame that they need you to be in. And I was like, well, I can't, I'm struggling to time these. I don't know what to do. So we rang the hospital, and they told us to come in for an exam, a vaginal exam. So went in, and, they got all up in there and did their examination, and I was 4 centimetres dilated, and they said, well, there's no one here at the moment to help you. We're not going to keep you in overnight. You can come in first thing in the morning. This is on a Sunday morning. So there was not a lot of staff around. And yeah, they basically sent us home, told me to keep doing what I was doing, take Panadol, that kind of thing. Yeah, it was really, they were very nonchalant about it, and quite like, well, you're not ready to be in here, you're not ready to give birth, so go home. And being a first-time mum, when you're told that, it's quite confusing, because you sort of don't know what's going to happen when they send you home, and am I going to be in a safe place if they send me home, and something, and it progresses quite rapidly from there. Like, you just don't know these things. But then anyway, it didn't really progress much overnight, did it? And then we went in the next morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they immediately broke my waters. I don't even remember being asked about that, like whether I wanted that to happen. It was just, come in, this is what we're going to do to you. And there was meconium in the waters, and they immediately told me that that was a sign of distress for the baby. Which, I now know that it's not, but it's just that it was the beginning of this fear-based treatment of me, and, well, not even of me, because I sort of feel like a lot of my trauma is based around the fact that they just treated me like a vessel and that the baby was more important than me. And I wasn't even really communicated with. I was just done, I had things done to me. And yeah, it just went from them telling me that he was distressed at 7 in the morning to putting me on the syntocinon drip on the very lowest dose and me going into an intense, agonizing contraction that just did not end. It was relentless. And I couldn't get my breath, and it just went on and on and on and on and on. And I said to Adam at one point, I just kill me. I just don't want to. I want to die. It's just awful, and I couldn't get any relief at all. And I wasn't allowed in the water or anything like that, was I? Because I was on, I was hooked up to everything.
Were you? At what point did you have your epidural?
Yeah, so I think it was maybe halfway through the day after laboring like this for hours. I think 5 or 6 hours that they gave me an epidural, which I had to wait for our friend down the hallway 2 doors down who was getting her epidural for having endured the same thing. Had to wait for her to get hers. I remember that distinctly. I don't know why, I just do. But yeah, then the anaesthetist came and gave me my epidural, and I remember sitting there holding a pillow and my body was just rocking, but I couldn't feel the rocking. I was obviously, my body was trying to cope with the intense agonizing pain, and he was telling me to sit still, otherwise it could get really dicey. Yeah. And I finally got my epidural and I finally got some relief, and I just fell straight asleep. I think I had been on the gas before that, but nothing was kind of helping with the pain, because it's just not the kind of contraction that you can actually handle naturally.
Yeah.
And all this time I was hooked up to the CTG, and on the bed. I was on the floor on the ball at one point, but it was just, it just wasn't doing anything because it was just out of control. And so, yeah.
Isn't it madness how they broke your waters, discovered there's meconium there, tell you that that's because the baby's distressed, and then give you a drug that we know causes much stronger contractions and limits the amount of oxygen that the baby can receive, because the placenta can't reinfuse itself with oxygenated blood because of all this like tension and contractions that are going on, right? And so increasing the chances of the baby getting distressed or getting further distressed. And I'll just say for the listeners right now that meconium in the waters can be a sign of distress, but often it's just a natural part. You said you were 41 plus 6, the baby's gut has matured, and sometimes they poo in the water because they've reached that stage of maturity, and it's not a sign of distress. But yeah, just that, like the contradiction and like, or the saying the baby's distressed and then giving you a drug that increases the likelihood of fetal distress.
Yeah, it's very much we're going to push you from the top of the stairs and catch you at the bottom and say that we saved you. It's that whole mentality of, we're going to do these things to you, but then we're going to turn around and say that, we're the reason why, it could have gone really bad, but we turned it around and we saved the day, and it's just, like you say, it's such a contradiction in terms, like, there was the other point about that meconium is that they said that at 7 o'clock in the morning, and then nothing was done all day. So if it really was that distressed, if he was that distressed and it was really that concerning, why didn't they act on it then? And that will stick with me as a real, and the fact that, like you say, they give you a drug that's going to cause you to go into further kind of tension and pain and all that kind of stuff, which will make the situation for me and the baby worse. It just, that's where it all began, and that's like the critical part of this, where the lie is really obvious, that it's not this is not acting in our best interest as women, as birthing women, and for the baby. Yeah, it's really not great. And it continued on, and that cascade of interventions happened right across that day. And there was various points where the trace from the monitor was stretched diagonally out across this pretty large room, and it was going all the way across the room. And they had obstetrician, like VMOs, I think they call them, or coming in groups into my room, not introducing themselves and standing in the corner and reading the trace. And I just felt like open slather, like,
But you don't know any better.
no.
So you just accept it all.
Yeah.
But you also get told, you lose all your dignity and stuff during childbirth, like that you're going to have multiple people staring up your vagina, so you need to not worry about that. You need to not worry about if you have any poo or anything like that. But it was more than that. And when I think back on it now, so many people and like were in there, and I had no idea who they were or why they were in there, or hadn't been asked permission for them to be in there. And it's so violating.
Yeah.
And such a breach of like such a private, intimate event. And like Adam said, you just don't know any better, so you just accept it and you're polite and you let them do that, and it's wrong. It's so wrong. But yeah, so this happened over the course of the day. I had the epidural, and then by 4 o'clock-ish, nothing had changed, and I was getting in a real state. I was so tired, and yeah, they ended up putting the probe on Hayden's head, and an obstetrician that came in, like, my name is Celia, and it was funny that she came in and her name was Cecilia, and she was the only one that introduced herself, and she came in and she said, look, I need to do this test on him to check how he's going, and I have to warn you, if it's a level 4.5 or above, we need to go to emergency Caesar, because he's getting distressed and things are not moving. And I was like, okay. And she did the test and it was a 9. And within minutes, I had like 13 or 14 people around me, like medical staff, putting stockings on me and telling me all this stuff, information, and basically consenting to having a cesarean. And it was like a crash cesarean. It was just full on. They were running me down the hallway. They were kicking other people out of the theatre. Adam didn't have time to, like, they had to put me out to GA. And that's all I remember is that. And then I woke up in the recovery ward and I had no idea where I was. None of the staff in there reassured me and told me anything about the baby. I kept trying to pull out my oxygen one tube things, and they kept shoving it back in and not listening to me when I was talking to them, and I was really distressed. And yeah, eventually after a bit they wheeled me out and Adam was there with Hayden in his arms, and I didn't recognize Hayden, and he said, he's our baby. And it was a bit of an emotional moment, not because I was like, oh, that's my baby, it was emotional because I had no connection to him whatsoever. And yeah, it was just like a shock moment, like, what happened? Yeah, it was awful.
Yeah, and isn't this interesting, you sharing this, and clearly that's a traumatizing thing, right? This is not how we expect meeting our baby for the first time to look or feel or sound or any of this. And yet you just said to us at the start of this talk that you turned up to a talk on birth trauma. clueless that you had experienced birth from yourself. And this is how conditioned we are to accept traumatic birth experiences as normal, as this is just how childbirth is. Adam sort of mentioned it earlier as well. You don't know what you don't know, so you just go with the flow. I'm really interested, Adam, to hear how that experience was for you. Initially with Kiki, I was about to call you Celia, Kiki saying, just kill me, like I just want to die, and and then I imagine there was a bit of relief when she got the epidural, and there was pain gone, but then this crash Caesar, and you end up with the baby, and Kiki's not there. What was that all like for you?
Trying to think back to how I felt. I believe I just thought things were happening the way they should have been happening. Up to the point where we were rushed off, and then I was like scared. So I went from just feeling like everything was normal, but that's like I was just oblivious to how unnatural it all was, to just being scared. And like that stopped once I was holding Hayden. And then and then I just expected to see Kiki on the other side, like as in, like, oh yeah, that was a Caesar, like it was an emergency one, but she'll be right. Like, it's just, I look back on it all now and I'm like, wow, I was so naive.
We don't know what we don't know, and all we do know, growing up in a culture of very much over medicalized birthing, and that birth is risky and scary and dangerous and painful and undignified and all these things, then we are primed to accept that is just how birth is.
Yeah, just to accept the chaos.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
And accept them leading the charge. It's a medical staff led birth. And because all of our friends, same experience, and all variations of that. And the fact that we didn't actually talk about it, and discuss it amongst each other and really kind of suss out, hey, why are we all having these same kind of results? Why are we all ending up in emergency Caesars? Why are we having feelings of being mistreated? Because there was feelings there about the way I was being spoken to and the way the aftermath went down, which was that when I was in the ward, I was in the same bed that I was put into theatre in, which was wound up at the foot of the bed. So it's a manual. So to sit up, you had to wind this thing at the foot of the bed. So obviously being in the bed, you can't do that. And because I'd been cut open, I had no way to lift the bed up so I could get out to get to Hayden. And he was in that, plastic bassinet thing on the trolley, screaming his little lungs out. And, first night, and he wasn't allowed to stay in there because I was in a shared ward. And the midwives weren't coming to my buzzer to try and, so I had to try and sit up by myself with this, being cut through 7 layers of tissue and all various things. And I think I tore a couple of the stitches on my right hand side, which to this day I've still got numbness in that area of my stomach. And And when I finally got up, I was bleeding. I was attached to the catheter, and you know, I didn't know what to do. I was in a morphine haze. This poor little baby was so vulnerable, and I felt completely out of my depth. I had no idea what was going on, and I just needed help, and it was an absolute mess. And I remember walking out to the front reception, and the midwife that was supposed to be looking after me, I think it was the second night, not the first night, but the midwife that was looking after me basically looked at me and laughed and went, "Welcome to motherhood." So I had not only the trauma of what happened to birth at the birth, but then the aftermath of being spoken to like I was just not coping as a mother, or not a good enough mother, like, and because my milk hadn't come in as well, I was being treated like a cow, and they were coming in and trying to hand express me. They were feeding Hayden formula hourly. They were trying to, like, I had to pump hourly. And so I was on this really overwhelming schedule. And it got so bad that Hayden was projectile vomiting because he was just getting overloaded with milk and formula. And it was just awful. So it's a birth and it's a postpartum, whole trauma story. And it will never leave me. And the flow-on effect from that is that when we fell pregnant with Heidi, I didn't want to ever experience that again. And still not recognizing that it was trauma, but just not wanting to put myself through that rigmarole and the all the crappy, I didn't want to go into GA again, I just wanted to be present and not in a drug haze. And I tried to talk with the obstetricians about it, and I got met with, here's the notes from your previous birth. Everything seems clinically standard and fine, and I was like, but it wasn't, it went really badly, and that wasn't my experience. But I just sort of got met with, well, we can't do anything about it now, and everything was clinically done as it should have been done. And I was like, okay. And no one ever sort of said to me, hey, do you want to try for a VBAC at that point? It was just easier for them to just go, okay, well, do you want another cesarean, and we can elect the date, and so you can prepare and plan. And I was like, okay, because that was the way to save myself and the birth to some degree.
That was mitigating the risk of re-experiencing a similar trauma, right?
Exactly.
And taking some control of the experience.
Yeah, literally. And what ended up being quite an eventful pregnancy, where they diagnosed me with gestational diabetes with Heidi at 13 weeks gestation as well. Which, again, now I know is just ridiculous. And I was borderline, like on the cusp of the 5.1 mole that you needed to be that or under. I was like just a pinch over. And I got treated at, like a fat camp kind of kid, like they put me in the gestational diabetes, like, high risk clinics, and I had to go and see a dietitian every time I went for an antenatal appointment, and it was all just bloody ridiculous. And then they ended up putting me on insulin, so I was injecting myself with insulin. I think it was like twice a day.
Oh, just once a day, but
maybe. And then leading up to the cesarean, I had to inject myself with Clexane as well, 6 weeks before and 6 weeks after, for 6 weeks. So I was stabbing myself with needles, and honestly, my blood sugars weren't bad, and I was actually managing really well with diet and exercise and all that sort of stuff, and I didn't need it. And it did nothing. Like they were ultrasounding me very regularly, and saying she was going to be a big baby and she had a big belly and all this sort of stuff. But all three of my children have had like little round Buddha bellies, and that's just the way that they are. But all three of them, like Hayden was overdue, he was only just over 9 pounds. Heidi was 7 pound on the dot, and this one was 8 pound 10. So none of my babies have been huge babies, and all of the ultrasounds were wildly inaccurate. And when I came along to your healing birth trauma talk at the Bethlehem Birthing Centre, and you questioned me about whether I needed another scan and why I was doing that, and what was the information that could be obtained from that scan, and what would it then kind of go on to impact in my pregnancy and then birth. When you questioned me about that, that was the beginning of me starting to question everything. And I think, had you not asked me that question, things could have gone really differently. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't even recall that, but it sounds like something I would do, because I think this is the work we need to do as women preparing to birth, is to look at why we are making the decisions we're making, why we believe that it's safest to do this, like get to the root of your understanding of why you've come to these decisions. Why are you choosing to birth in hospital? Why are you choosing that care provider? Why are you choosing to invite those people into your birth space? Why are you choosing those interventions? And scans are one of those, things that, isn't that just what everybody does? Isn't that what we have to do? Doesn't that keep things safer? Don't we need to check for problems? And we aren't, it's like so many interventions in birth, in pregnancy and birth. There is such a lack of informed consent taking place when we say, yeah, sure, I'll go for that scan. Because, there are consequences of finding the information that the scan provides. And, we know that you said before, they were wildly inaccurate with their estimation of baby sizes, right? But they have other inaccuracies as well. And so once you get this information, then what's going to be done with it? So you go along for these, growth scans, and they discover the baby is bigger than expected. Well, what are you going to do with that information? Is that going to change your decisions around where you're going to give birth or what other interventions you're going to agree to? And if it's not, then is it helpful to have that scan in the first place? So yeah.
And I like the way that you're talking about, like, what are we as the birthing mother going to do with that information? But I was never thinking like that either. So I was thinking it's their information for them and their purposes. And having you just turn that perspective around and help me understand that actually, no, I'm in the driver's seat. I get to call the shots, and it's my body. And kind of you giving me permission to take the power back and take the decisions back and be able to make those decisions for me and for what I wanted. And I think at the time I was in talks with various birth workers via Instagram, and a couple of them had mentioned that the best chance of having a VBAC was at home. And so I started to gather information around that and really start schooling myself hard. Like I went like every day, like probably, drove my family up the wall with the podcast that I was listening to every day religiously, and all the books that I was reading, and like I was like, hey Adam, did you know this? And just kind of relaying information. bookmarking and highlighting and
Picking the kids up from school, and there's a
What was
podcast.
that, Adam?
Oh, I just remember Hayden mentioning that every time we got in the car after school, there'd be a podcast on.
every morning when I took them to school, and actually he said today, because I had a podcast on, it was around babies and the circle of security, but he said to me, Mum, I thought you said after you had the baby that the podcast would finish. So I was like, oh, sorry, mate. Yeah. But it was, I was religious about it because I knew that I had been so in the dark for so long that my only way forward through this was to empower myself with knowledge, so that I could feel confident in saying no, or saying I'm doing this, or saying I'm not going to do this, and here's why. And not feeling as vulnerable about it when I said it. Like, I wanted to feel empowered, and like I could, really, if I had to, justify my decision, because I knew that I was going to have to. Yeah.
Well, yeah. To who?
Yeah.
But yes, we do feel obliged often to justify our decision making, when the reality is we don't have to justify. We don't have to have evidence to back up the decisions we're making. It's our bodies that,
I think I'd already experienced with my LMC, though, her questioning various things, and so I knew that I was going to get asked questions, and I think rather than, well, maybe justify is not the right word, but I would have to kind of be able to talk about the decisions that I was making, and I guess it's justification, but it was more like I knew I was going to get questioned about it, because it wasn't the norm. And I'd already spoken to one midwife who basically refused point blank to support me to VBAC after 2 cesareans.
VBAC at home or VBAC?
Just VBAC. Yeah.
Really?
She said because of my age, so I was 41, because it was 2 cesareans, and because of my slightly higher BMI at the time. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Just 3 very stupid reasons for risking me out in her mind. Yeah. And I, at that point, it wasn't even a home birth. So she rightly, like, within her rights, said, I don't feel safe doing that, supporting you to do that. But now looking at, after doing it and knowing what I know, like, what were you so afraid of? It's just, it's crazy. The fear around things that are so, like, marginal risk factors, it don't really impact it at all.
It's like any job, though. If somebody doesn't have the experience in that area, then they're going to shy away from it.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the thing, right? Not enough natural births happening for people to be experienced in them. So
that's right. They lose trust. They don't have any trust in the woman's ability to birth without these interventions or outside kind of monitoring, etc. And so their fear is put onto the birthing woman. She doesn't trust herself, and you're right. And it's becoming a dying art, the art of true midwifery, where midwives, their role is to protect normal birth, is to protect physiological birthing. And that's what they are supposed to be most skilled at, is normal births, and seeing when something veers from normal to such a degree that they, that the safest course of action is to guide the woman to be under secondary care, to be under the care of somebody who is a specialist in the things that go wrong. But we have pathologized pretty much everything. I mean, 41 years old, come on, like what is, you know, let's look at the holistic picture and then also acknowledge that it is still a woman's right to choose, even if she is deemed to be a little higher risk and in this area or that area or whatever. It's still her right to choose her path, the way she wants to birth. And the problem is that if you are wanting to birth with midwifery care, it's getting harder and harder to find a midwife who feels confident enough with normal birthing, with physiological birthing, outside of that sort of systematic sort of care, that you're left with little to no options a lot of the time, if you're choosing to go down a non-mainstream kind of route, if you're choosing to say no to those common interventions, which was your experience, right, Kiki? So like, how the rest of your pregnancy unfolded once you kind of started delving into I want a home birth.
I wasn't 100% set on the home birth. I just had it as the option, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I can go for the birth center as well, because I was still so naive about it, and I still hadn't found out enough information to go, actually, no, I'm good. I'm going to do this at home at that point. And I was trying to find a midwife that would support me to VBAC, so I wasn't set, like I wasn't worried about the venue so much as the VBAC.
Right.
And then through my connections through work, I managed to find a midwife who was 40 minutes away from us. And you don't really generally do that either, like see a midwife all the way out at, we're in Bethlehem and she was out at Te Puke, so it was quite a distance away. And it was so kind of like difficult to even get in to see her. She was like, oh, I'm actually fully booked for October, but since you're right at the end of October, I'll maybe include you in my November group and I'll just squeeze you in, but I can't do your postnatal because you're so far away from me, and my partner wouldn't agree to doing that. And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about, because this is my first birth in New Zealand. I had no idea how the system worked. And I now know that, they have modules. So there's the antenatal, the birth, and the postnatal modules, and they couldn't kind of do the postnatal module. So then I had to try and find another midwife that would agree to doing the postnatal module before the midwife would agree to doing the antenatal and the birth. So I was like, oh my God. It's just getting really complicated. So I was like, okay, I'll find one. And so I messaged another one and she agreed to do the postnatal at the time. And then she ended up leaving, going to the UK to look after her mother, and her partner was no longer able to do it. And then so we had to find another one. And so there was all of that drama going on while I was starting to see this midwife. And at first it was okay. At first we were just going through the rhythm, and because I was still kind of naive about, things I wanted and what I didn't want, and I wasn't refusing scans and stuff at that point. But then around the 23-week mark, things started getting a little bit different, and the baby had been in a breech presentation at the 23-week scan, which is insignificant, doesn't mean anything. But my midwife all of a sudden started getting a little bit paranoid about the position of baby from 23 weeks, which was weird. Because even I knew that babies just move around, like that's just what they do. She was lying transverse for most of the scan, and then she turned into a breech position, and she just was constantly moving, and I could feel her moving in me, and the hospital had ordered me to tried to order me to get a number of growth scans after that 20-week scan. And they had obviously sent the correspondence through to the midwife, and then she said, oh, are you going to have these scans? And I, at that point, had done enough research and had spoken to you and had started questioning things and going, actually, no, I'm not going to do any more scans, which was kind of ignored. My no was ignored, and she kept trying to get me to have more scans. And that's where I started to really feel that fear and that paranoia about the position of Lara. And it was really frustrating because I was starting to notice that she wasn't hearing me in any of the appointments. And I would talk to her about my previous birth trauma and say, the reason I'm doing X, Y, Z is because I don't want the same level of trauma. I don't want any trauma at this birth. I want to try for a different, more positive result. And I want this to be, you know, the birth that kind of changes my story a little bit, or a lot. And it just fell upon deaf ears. And I think that's where the relationship started breaking down, is that I just felt so unseen and so unheard and very distant and untrusting of her. But when Adam came along to I think it was the 31-week mark appointment, she basically demanded that I trust her. In the birthing scenario, if it got to the point where she said to me, we need to go, like we need to leave, because I decided I wanted to do a home birth because I knew that I would have the best possible chance of having an undisturbed VBAC, and just VBAC in general at home, because that is where it's going to be most supported. That is where I'm not going to have any medical interventions or any staff coming in and doing what they do. And you know, and I could have the control and the power and lead my birth at home, and it's my space. And you know, that safety that I felt being at home really started to really drive me,
yeah,
in my decision making. And she basically was saying, if we need to go from home to the hospital and I tell you we need to go, then you need to trust me and we need to move. And it was at that point, I didn't realize, but she had kind of triggered me. And I recall the obstetrician in Hayden's birth saying the same thing. We need to go, you need to trust me, we need to move fast, you know. And it was like on repeat. It was happening again, and I'm like, there's something not right about this, and I'm not happy about this. And yeah, my gut really started to scream at me, like, yeah. And thankfully I had started attending the Trust Home Birth tauranga group, and talking to some really, really wise women at this group, both mothers and birth workers, and really getting connected in with their energy. And they were really, questioning hard the language and the tone and the feeling that I was getting from my midwife, and saying, I don't know that you need to actually have this person at your birth, and really challenging whether she was the right person for me. And that was great, like, because it, not only that, but they were empowering me to stand up and say no, and say it's not right and we're not aligning. And yeah.
I remember at that time I really found it weird or odd, the lack of like connection between the two of you.
Yeah.
And I was like trying to suggest things like, oh, why don't you just go and have a coffee with her? You know what I mean? Like, try and break down the walls.
It was just interesting because he was feeling that lack of connection and that lack of trust and that lack of relationship and rapport that we had. And if he's feeling it, then it's significant.
Because like this is a pretty important thing that you're going to go through, and to have somebody there who's like doesn't seem like they really care about what you want
Yeah.
or care about the experience that you're after. Yeah, how's that? It's never going to work.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Because the appointment that he came to, it was about the birth plans. And so my birth plans were very detailed, but detailed to the point of I had a set for my home birth and a set for my if I had to transition to hospital. And the reason I wrote out all the things that I did was because I had a lack of trust in medical professionals, and I didn't want to get to the situation where I didn't have a voice because I was, in labor or unable to advocate for myself. Like I'd spoken with you about it, and I'd really researched about the fact that you go into this liminal state where you can't function. All the functioning parts of your brain, your logical parts of your brain, was it the amygdala or something, switch off?
No, it's your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for all the like rational thinking and communication of ideas and the questioning and the talking, the language, all of that.
Yeah. So I knew that was going to switch off at some point. So I had all of that there so that I could have Adam, and I had a doula as well who is a friend of ours, and her and Adam were going to use these birth plans to distribute to, whoever was in my birth space, be it at home or in the hospital, but they were also going to use it to advocate for me as well. So it was just like a set of plans that didn't have to be followed to the T, but if X situation arose, here's what I wanted, and why, and they were just, it was to protect the birth that I so dearly wanted. And she didn't read them. She didn't read them until well down the track, and
you
never discussed them with me either. Yeah.
You were saying that you created these based on your previous pregnancies to births.
Yeah.
But to me, and like what a couple of the other midwives were saying, closer to the birth of Lara, was that they were written by somebody who wasn't being heard in that, in this pregnancy as well. So, like that lack of, again, it comes back to that lack of connection, I guess, with this midwife, meant that you had to create these overworked plans to try and get your message across.
Yeah. And to try and protect yourself, as you put it before, Kiki, which I think is a good way of describing it. It's like, this is one way I can express what my needs are. And it's actually, if you are in a position where you can't voice what's going on for you, they're legally required to acknowledge what your requests are in your birth plan.
And I later after, we'll talk about it in a bit, but after that relationship ended with that midwife, the midwives that took over actually said, this is perfect. These are exactly what women should be doing. And we love women like you who know exactly what they want and how they want it, and have that voice and want to, because it just means like if we need to go to the hospital, this is her birth plans. You follow this. And yeah, they were kind of grateful that I had done that, because then it was just like a roadmap for how to speak to me, how to be within the birth space, how to deal with different situations that arose, and they didn't have to think. I had done all the thinking and the planning for them, and that's exactly what I wanted to do, is just have that there just in case. And it was, and so I didn't need to be asked the question.
I think the other thing that these midwives were grateful for around your birth planning, because I was privy to these beautiful online conversations that were taking place around this, which will all come a bit clearer as we share more of your story, was that you were taking responsibility for your radical responsibility. Now, this is huge, because a lot of women expect that their care providers, their midwives, doctors, will take responsibility for the decision making, for the flow of events, etc. Which means that so if you're somebody who's saying, no, this is what I'm choosing and I'm taking responsibility, I'm aware of the consequences of various outcomes, and this is what of various decisions, and this is what is important to me, and I accept responsibility for if something doesn't go as planned. I'm responsible for the outcomes. That is a safety net for midwives, or a form of safety, because there are still other people who might put a complaint in against that midwife, etc. But to know that you are working with a woman who's saying, I'm taking ownership of my experience, I'm taking responsibility for the decisions, I'm also taking responsibility for whatever outcomes occur from those decisions, is a big, that's important for midwives who are stepping up and supporting women who are choosing to birth outside of mainstream sort of support.
Yeah, and because I took your soulful birth course as well, part of that was in that course you talked about accepting the death aspect of it, and that we don't talk about it, and that it's very much a part of the birth world, that there are sometimes situations where it results in death, and if we need to have these conversations to say, well, if I'm making these decisions and I'm taking responsibility for the outcome, then the outcome could be death, and I need to be aware of that and accept that. And that struck a real chord with me, and I realized, you also said that we're taking responsibility for these little creatures once they're out of us, from the moment they're born all the way through to when they take over taking responsibility for themselves, and then even beyond that, So I was like, that's so true. Why am I relinquishing and handing over my power and my responsibility in this to all these external people, when this is a life I'm growing within me? This is my body, this is my birth, and this is my birth experience, and none of these people have to live with the consequences of that except me. And so taking this radical responsibility, it sounds like something way, left field, but it's actually like just being really kind of actively in control of your body, your birth, and your baby, like that's that process, and that part of your life, that rite of passage, it's no one else's responsibility but ours. And when we let all these other people make decisions for us, it gives away all our power, and I didn't want to give an inch of power to anybody. So much so that, like, even Adam and I had to have a conversation at one point, because he was a bit worried about potentially not having a midwife at our home birth, because things were getting really uncertain with her, and I had gotten to the point where I was like, if I need to birth at home, with just Adam and the doula, I was prepared to do that because I wasn't going to sacrifice or compromise anything in this birth for anyone's fear. And I said to Adam, if you can't get to the point where you are on board with this and you trust in me and my ability to birth, and you're gonna just support me no matter what, like, and kind of get to the level of knowledge and education that I was at, then you can't be at the birth either. And that was a really shitty, hard conversation to have with him, but it was necessary because it was, again, me taking full responsibility for my body, my birth, my baby, you know, like I wasn't gonna end up going down the same routes again to appease other people's fear, so that, and then that resulted in the birth not going the way I wanted it to go, even though it could have, you know. I wasn't gonna let that happen. And I think really if people out there are looking to VBAC or HBA2C or, you know, beyond, that's something you really have to actually embrace and accept and do, is not only educate yourself, but stand on your own 2 feet and say, this is my body, this is my birth, and I need to take full responsibility all the way from pregnancy right through. Yeah, it's crucial. And
this requires quite a lot of unpacking and of delving into our conditioning that has encouraged us to believe that a responsible mother trusts that the doctors know best, trusts the professionals, and a responsible mother, you know, doesn't give more weight to her instincts and intuition than to the professionals who have years of training and experience under their belt in this sphere. Or there is, a good woman, a good mother, a good girl will do as she's told and not rock the boat and not question authority figures, and you know, be appeasing and be quiet and not kick up a fuss. And so many of us hold all these internalized beliefs that we're not even that conscious of, that we're not even that aware of, that are feeding into this disempowering experience that starts from the get-go in our pregnancies. And by the time it comes to birth, oh my gosh, we've handed over so much power and control and responsibility to these authority figures that, we're just kind of going through the machine and getting spat out the other side and being told, yep, that's just how birth is, be grateful, at least you've got a healthy baby.
I hate that. I hate that. I hate hearing it. Because I've heard it twice. And I wish to God I'd never have to hear that line again. But I do hear it from friends and family, and you know, all the time. And like you say, I had to do so much work around unconditioning the conditioning that I had, the good girl, the people pleaser, the don't be impolite, you know, don't upset people, don't go against the grain, do as you're told, you know. I had to do a lot of work around that, but I also had to do a lot of work around trusting my body, because I'd never been able to use it in that way before. I'd never known, and actually I had developed the sense that my body doesn't work properly because it failed me, because that's what they said to me, you know, a failure to progress, in the notes, you know. And I was made to feel like my body failed, and that's the reason why we had the crash emergency Caesar, and I never got help around that. But when I did your soulful birth, but then I also did a session with a couple of sessions with Sian, who did your unraveling your trauma.
So Sian did my healing birth practitioner training, and as the last piece of that training, they are required to hold what I call a practice client session, which is where they have an unraveling your trauma, hold an unraveling your trauma session with somebody like yourself who says, yep, I'm keen for one of those with one of your, trainees, your soon to be graduates, in exchange for your feedback and a koha. And so, yeah, you did a couple of sessions with Sian, and what was that experience like for you?
It was eye-opening. Like, I had no idea how deeply ingrained that conditioning was. Right back to childhood, I didn't realize that has actually steered my life in directions where I didn't really need to go, like it's strange because I'm not afraid of speaking. I'm not afraid of standing up in front of a crowd and doing dumb stuff and, making people laugh and all that kind of stuff. But for some reason, I'm afraid of saying no to authority figures. I'm afraid of challenging them. And yet I know that quite often I would go into medical practices or doctors' surgeries and things like that. And I would know more about my body and what was going on with my children than they would. And then they would agree with my diagnosis. So then I had to start really analyzing all of the times where I'd spoken to a medical expert and my body had told me what was going on, or I had known things long before it had become apparent to external people that was what was happening. And during that first labor and that first birth, there were moments where my body was speaking to me. So I had to really, really channel those and think back into them and lean into them and go, okay, my body was talking to me and trying to instinctively tell me what to do, and I ignored it because we're taught to ignore it and we're taught to listen to these people outside of us. And that took a lot of work and a lot of kind of really, challenging those belief patterns and things like that. And Sian did an amazing job tapping into that and really listening to what I was saying and picking up on the little points that she knew I hadn't fully realized, and then reflecting that back to me, and then me going, oh my God, like it was really eye-opening, and it was really, really cool because it was the start of me going, I can do this, and there's nothing wrong with me, and there's nothing wrong with my body, and I can birth at home, and I'm going to be safe, and this is going to happen. And it's when I started really getting juiced about having this home birth, and I was starting to get really proud of the fact that I was going to do this, and I was envisaging it, and it was going to happen no matter what, I jumped on the home birth train. So then I had those sessions and then went on to sort of start challenging my midwife from there. And that wasn't taken very kindly. And I had some really hard conversations with her. One of them went for 2.5 hours, and it was very challenging, but I stood my ground. And I think I knew at that point it wasn't going to work, but there's still that good girl conditioning, and I was still trying to, I think for me, I like to make sure I've tried every angle to make it work, and then I know I've done my best, and then I can close that off. So I was still at the point where I just wanted to try a couple more things. And then, it got to the point where she was challenging me by saying that her partner was not agreeing to do the lead care. So when she wasn't available, if my birth happened to fall upon the time when she wasn't available, then her partner would take over as the lead, the LMC. But her partner had said that she wasn't willing to do that because she felt it's too high risk. but she was willing to second. And this was at the time she had found Des, who ended up being my midwife, and she had agreed to second. And so I said to her, well, I'm not happy with someone that's already fearful around coming to my birth, my home birth. So can you please arrange for Des to be your partner for my birth? And then I got ghosted. And then I got a message saying, I'm no longer willing to be your LMC. And because I've tried so hard to get you to see that I'm trying to support you and you're not willing to compromise, and I'm not willing to risk my practice, and yada, yada, yada. Basically saying she felt I was too high risk, that I wasn't listening to her, and yeah, she didn't feel safe. Which is funny because it was like the exact thing that I was feeling. She wasn't listening to me and I didn't feel safe. And so I was quite relieved at that point. And I had been in communication with you and I had said that this is what was going on, and you had jumped into your forum with all your beautiful wise women and found me this amazing team of wise women who just rallied for me. And you know, we all jumped on a Zoom, and immediately when it got on that Zoom, and it was in my 39th week, you know, which she was born at 39 and 3.
Yeah.
When we got on that Zoom.
Before you sort of flesh out what kind of transpired from there, just to explain, so the forum that I am in is a collective, I guess, of midwives and birth workers and birth passionate people like myself who have a real keen desire or drive to protect physiological birthing, to protect women's rights in birth, to protect the women like yourself who are wanting to birth their way, and their way does not look like what the system would like it to look like. And like I said earlier, there are fewer and fewer midwives, especially after the COVID mandates took a number of our incredible midwives who are all about supporting women's right to choose and protecting that, honouring that it's a woman's body, it's a woman's birth, it's a woman's baby, that you should be the one choosing your birth path. Yeah, that we're like, we need to protect this somehow, and so we sort of have this forum having these discussions and that. And I said to you after you'd contacted me, and once you'd been fired by your midwife,
Yeah.
I said, do you mind if I like take screenshots of these messages you've been sending me, you know, because you'd sent me the message that your midwife had sent you, and put it on this forum and just see if any of the midwives on there are able to step up and be your midwife, because although you were willing to free birth, it wasn't your number one choice, right? Like, you were wanting midwifery support, but you needed it to be with somebody who trusted you and who supported your right to choose. Yeah.
And who believed in physiological birth, you know, and believed in a woman's ability to do that. Yeah. And who wasn't risked out because of fear.
Yeah.
And of things, you know, like, I think one of the midwives' main concern was uterine rupture, which we know is less than 0.5% risk factor. And I had 5 to 6 years between each of my births as well, so there's plenty of time. It wasn't like they were fresh uterine, and there was no attachment of the placenta or anything like that, or uterus to the scar. But the fear around that was insane. Yet there's a 99.5+% chance that it's not going to end up that way. It's going to end up fine. You know, like the focus of this midwife on that 0.5% chance or less than of a uterine rupture was nuts. Just
Didn't she want an ambulance in
yeah.
your drive during your labor if she was going to be at your birth? Was it?
She literally said, I really I'm not feeling safe because you won't get a scan to show position and growth, and you won't get the blood test because you don't want, you know, XYZ, and you don't want to have a cannula put in your hand and taped up ready to go to the hospital if we need to, you know. So in order to make me feel safe, I would like to have an ambulance on call and or have one sitting on the street at the bottom of the driveway ready to take you to hospital. And I mean, I was just dumbfounded at that point. It was just out the gate fear. Yeah. And yeah, I'm so glad she stepped away because she did me a hell of a favor. But, you know, she should have stepped away when I had the initial hard conversation with her, when I asked and when I said to her, we're not aligning and I need to go elsewhere. But she made me feel guilty about potentially, she said, kicking the gift horse in the mouth, which is the wrong phrase anyway. Like, you know, but she was putting herself on this pedestal of being a gift horse to me, and that no other, she literally said to me, I don't know of any other midwife that would support you to do this, given what you're demanding, essentially. Yeah, which, and I was just so confused by that because nothing that I had asked for was out the gate. Nothing, it was not weird. It was not, you know, extra. There was nothing demanding about anything that I was asking for. It was just research, evidence-based stuff that I knew would support me to have the best possible birth experience. Yeah. And so when we finally jumped on this Zoom with these beautiful women, I just immediately let go of trying to protect this birth because they just held it. They held this birth and they were like, this is exactly why we do what we do. And we are going to protect this for you. And I just knew I could let go at that point. And it was amazing feeling. Yeah, I was like, wow, what did I do to deserve such amazing women in my life who just knew exactly what I was saying before I even said it. You know, they had been following through via you what was going on, and they were so appalled with the way I'd been treated. And it was just such a relief to be able to relinquish that protection and that control of a birth that I wanted so much, and knew that they had me and they would support me in that. And it was a really cool feeling. I was like, finally.
Yeah.
And I think, honestly, I think because Adam was there for the second Zoom meeting as well, and you know, they even talked to him about how he was feeling about it all, and he was, I can't remember exactly what you said, but he was just like so grateful that they had come to my aid and knew how important it was to us. Hey.
Yeah, I was like, where were they?
Hey.
Where were they before?
Yeah, like
where have you been hiding?
You sneaky little rats. Yeah. So yeah, it was just such a relief, and I think actually my body knew as well, because I think it was the day after I started having kind of pre-labor contractions or Braxton Hicks, but it was more intense, and I actually thought I was going into labor. And then the following day, the same again. And then I had a little bit of a break, and then the following day, another round of that.
Before
Yeah.
you, because like it's going to be so beautiful hearing you share your story. But before you do, I just want to share a little bit about the situation with these midwives who rallied around you. So there were, I think, 4 of them, right? One who's based here in Tauranga, but who was going to be away for a couple of weeks,
Yeah.
or maybe not that long, but for a period of time. There was one who was based in Whakatane, which is about like an hour's drive away. There was one down in Taranaki, which is like, I don't know, what, 4 hours away? And
Yeah.
yeah, and one in Waihi, which is like an hour away. And they between them were like, okay, I can be on call for these dates, and but I'm gonna have to, I can't be on call for these dates, and I can second here, and you know, like between them, they kind of developed this like timetable of there's not going to be any gaps where Kiki is not going to be able to be supported by you know, 2 of us, if need be, at her home birth. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they put together this schedule
Yeah.
and we're just like nutting it out how they were going to make it work. And, um, each of them individually said to me, please don't have the baby until I'm available. Like, try and hold off, which I thought was really cool. Like, yeah, it was just really lovely. Such a different energy.
Honestly, the team, should we call it the team? The
Yeah.
team were as excited about your birth as you were, Kiki.
Oh,
It's just like, yeah, this is what we're all about. Women like this. We want to support, we want to serve, we want to protect their right to birth their way. And yeah, so it was quite a buzz. And a lot of time and energy was put into these, you know, messaging and setting up Zoom calls and discussions and nutting things out. And it was all to serve you and your birth experience. How freaking awesome is that?
it was truly a show of what can happen when women work together and put their minds together and like to achieve that, like, because it was not easy for them to all coordinate like that. It took a bit of effort. um
The
yeah,
labor of love.
yeah, really, and really protecting what they hold so dear,
Yeah.
which was really cool. And I was literally just along for the ride,
Yeah.
so to speak. Yeah. um yeah, it was amazing.
Mm. Mm.
They're really cool ladies.
Something we didn't mention, that was part of what Adam was involved with was you guys came along to the Born at Home film.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah. That was actually kind of a key, like a pivotal moment, I think, for Adam. He sort of said to me afterwards, like he had really wanted to step up and educate himself after watching those films. So there was a Born at Home film, and we had previously watched Birth Time as well, which is quite luckily they were both set in Australia, and had come from the Australian maternity system, so it was very familiar to us, and really resonated with both of us. And because they had dads in there talking about their birth trauma experiences with their partners, and then what they went on to have with their amazing births at home, or perhaps not at home, but just kind of reclaiming their childbirth and being more in the driver's seat, well, being in the driver's seat. It really hit home, and it really made us both feel so much more comfortable with the idea of birthing at home, and that really birthing at home should be the norm. And that we only go into a hospital if things get complicated, or you've got medical complexities within your pregnancy or your body itself, because that's what the hospital is there for. They have the obstetric team there to support you if that's what you need, but that's not where you should be if there's nothing actually inherently wrong with your pregnancy, your baby, or you, you know. And actually, I was watching a series today, and it was set back in the time of, you know, the redcoats. I can't remember what sort of year time that was, but they all just went home and birthed. You know, that's they birthed at home. And why has that changed so dramatically? Like, home is where you feel safe. Home is where you're familiar with. Home is where your loved ones are, you know, and where you feel most relaxed. You've got your bed, you've got your, you know, everything around you is familiar and comforting and filled with love, because that's where your family is, you know, like, so naturally that should be where we all want to birth. And for some reason it's flipped and we don't birth at home. And like you said before, when we step outside of the mainstream, like, birthing at home shouldn't be stepping outside of the mainstream. It should be the mainstream. And I've totally changed my view on that. And I've actually managed to start changing the view of people around me on that too, which is really cool to see. Yeah.
Beautiful. All right, let's hear it. Let's hear the story.
Yeah, so I got to 39 and 3, and I'd had a few practice runs, as I said before, and Friday morning of Labour weekend, I woke up at about 4:30 in the morning, and I started getting really focused contractions or surges down in my pelvic area, and I was like, ooh, that woke me up. It's a bit different. But I don't know, I'd been a bit the boy who cried wolf, so I thought, oh, it's probably just another practice run, no dramas, just get up and you know, potted around, and I started getting this intense craving to kind of nest, and I got up and Adam was still in bed, and I sort of made the bed with him in it, like started, you know, tidying and cleaning, and I went in the bathroom and did the same thing and folded all the towels and put a bit of makeup on at 4:30 in the morning. Like, what? Such a bizarre instinctual kind of thing, instinctive. And went into the kids' rooms and did the same thing with them. And they had a teacher only day actually, so they were not going to school that day, which was kind of fortunate. And anyway, the surgery started getting a bit more intense, and I had to sort of lean on things and breathe through them. And I was like, oh, this feels a bit different than the other ones, you know, very, very focused intensity right in the pelvic area. And Adam got up to his work alarm, and he got his work clothes out and put them on the corner of the bed. And I remember looking at him, and he looked at me, and I said, "You're not going anywhere today. You're not leaving me." And it just came out of me. I didn't even have control over that, but I must have looked at him in the sense that, you know, if you leave me, I'm going to murder you. So he was like, oh, okay, no worries. Put his work clothes away. And then I went out into the living area, and I was having to really start to breathe through. I couldn't actually talk through them. So that had gone from like being manageable at about 5 a.m. to by 7 a.m. being quite strong. And I said to Adam, you need to get the TENS machine out and you need to put it on me now. And then things started happening quite quickly. And I said to him, can you please message the doula and message my sister and get them over here, because you need to be focused on helping me, not doing anything else. You know, because he was sort of starting to prepare for the breakfast stuff for the kids, and, you know, just doing things that weren't focused on me. And So yeah, he sent messages to the doula and to my sister, but they weren't sort of conveying the urgency because we all sort of felt like, or could it be, or is it not quite, But
Right.
very quickly, I realised it was the real deal. And by 9 o'clock, I messaged the doula myself and said, "Please come over as soon as you can." And she could tell by that I was serious and it was the real deal. And she was over there within 15 minutes. And then by the time she got over there, she messaged, we messaged all of the group. Like we had been on the phone with Michelle, who was sort of listening to me have my surges, and she knew kind of what I was doing in the surges, and she started kind of guiding me on the phone and then told me to ring Des. And so we rang Des and told her, and then she was over not long after that. But yeah,
Did
she
she
all the
tune
way from
over from
Waverley Beach.
Waiheke?
Yeah. So she'd driven like over an hour to get to me, which was really cool of her. And I didn't realize she was there until I opened my eyes and just saw her sitting down at eye level with me on the floor because I was leaning over my ball and scrunching the birth comb in my hand. But I looked over and out, and there she was just smiling at me. And I was like, wow, it's the first time I met her, but I instantly felt like connected, and trusting. And just her energy was so different to the previous midwife. It was really cool. So I had my team. I had my birth team. I had Adam in front of me talking to me. I had the doula, Medina, behind me. She had the TENS machine going and she was light touch massaging. And I had Des just quietly observing and being her wise woman self, sitting in the background and just doing the things that she was doing. I had no idea really what was going on outside of my internal world. I was very inward focused. I had no idea of the time or anything. I just knew that I needed to get into the pool quite soon. And Adam was, I remember hearing them talking to Adam about getting the pool ready, and that it was going to take some time. So we had set up a birth pool in the living area, inflated it, but there was no water in it. So then he started focusing on doing that. And I remember thinking at one point, it's not filling up fast enough.
Yeah.
Starting to panic because I knew I needed that for pain relief because I was just sort of laboring on the floor, on my knees, on the ball, leaning over the ball, lying on it. And I started to get a bit sore in the knees and just needing to take the weight off from the hanging belly. And, it was a lot. But at the same time, things were happening in my body, and I knew I had done so much education around the physiology side of birth that I knew what was happening at each point, and I was building trust in myself as these things were starting to, I was starting to get to these milestone points, and then my waters broke. I've never experienced my waters breaking, and it was just amazing. Like, it was a release, but it was just another sign that my body was doing exactly what it was meant to be doing, and it was lovely. And it was a real moment of yes, like, we're doing this, so that was super cool. And there was meconium in my waters.
Oh, was there?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that. That's how insignificant meconium is most of the time. Like this, just
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard your story, but I didn't know there was meconium because, it happens.
No one reacted. No one. Like,
Yeah.
Adam and the doula was like, I think you might have weed yourself. And I was like, no, that was my waters. And like, even that moment when they questioned what it was and me correcting and saying no,
Yeah.
that was my waters, was just like, yeah, like, I know my body, I know what's going on in there, and I know my birth, and I got this, and no one reacted to the meconium. Desiree did not even flinch. Like, we just carried on. And yeah, I kept laboring. And then I was like, ooh, the points in between, the surges started getting less and less and less. And I was like, okay, we're progressing. And then I remember thinking, I don't know how much more of this I can do. And I think I said that out loud. And then Des said, I think you're in transition, Keith. And I was like, okay, right. I know what transition is. This is progress. Okay. It's hard, but I can do this. Yeah. And then by that point, the pool was sort of filled enough. And I was like, I need to get in the pool. And because we had sort of discussed about when we were going to get in, or when I was going to get in, and we decided not to do that too early so that the relief was more, I guess, like when I needed it. Yeah. And it really was. It was lovely getting into that pool and getting some weightlessness happening. Yeah, it was great for my knees, and but just the warm water was really soothing on the intensity that was growing in my pelvis and my back. And I didn't know at the time, but Des was looking at the line of dilatation on my back as well and seeing how far dilated I was. And I didn't know that could happen for me.
The purple line.
Yeah, yeah. So again, you know, and how cool that she didn't have to do a vaginal examination at all the entire time, and still knew how I was going.
It's one of those things, kind of like, you know, the scans we were talking about earlier, that people just expect is like it's a given. It's what happens when you are in labor. You get checked vaginally, you know, you're told how dilated you are. You're checked to see if you're fully dilated before you're allowed to start pushing and all this bullshit. I've given birth 3 times. I have never experienced a vaginal exam in labor.
You never needed it.
And
Never
yeah,
needed it.
and guess what? My body just went ahead and like did what it was supposed to do. How bizarre.
Yeah, how bizarre. Yeah. And I didn't realize as well, but when you're giving birth, you know how your tailbone sort of curved and then it was lifting up as well to allow her through. And I was like, what? Like, what's going on? And she's like, yeah, your body's doing exactly what it's meant to be doing. And just that reassurance from her.
Yeah, it was just she played a pretty important role in making this whole home birth situation feel safe. I guess just because of it was just reassuring having somebody who had done this time and time again there. And I you know, like I remember, you know, throughout the stages, and just, you know, like I'd look up at her and look for cues in her facial expression, and it was quite reassuring seeing her smiling, and yeah, that sort of guided me through the experience.
How was it witnessing Kiki doing her thing in labor?
Yeah. So it's like it's all I make it sound like the whole time I was just staring at Des, um, which is not true at all. Um, but yeah, like I just felt so proud of, you know, like how far, you know, we'd pivoted from, you know, our, you know, other 2 births to this one, and that, I don't know, like I mean, while it was all happening, it's still all unknown territory. But I like, you know, being able to reflect on it, and, you know, being a part of it was was awesome. Like I would, if it works for you, or if you can do it, like birth at home. Okay, so back to like Kiki and witnessing Kiki going through the stages, and it's hard to put into words, but yeah, I just really felt lucky to be a part of a birth like that, and I was proud that she'd fought for that type of birth. I was proud that she gave herself or believed in herself enough to have that birth. And I'm just really happy for her that she now has that feather in her cap.
It's pretty cool, like, everything went off without a hitch. And Des said, I don't remember her saying this, but Adam said that she said it was a textbook fucking birth, like, fuck yeah. Like,
Yeah,
it was really cool.
Like I was surprised how I guess I said this to a couple of the guys in messages afterwards, was like that she just like she just bossed the baby out. Like yeah, like it was just really cool.
Yeah.
To witness.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what that kind of real pushing sensation was going to feel like. But as soon as I felt it take hold, I worked with it, and I really gave everything I had to those surges and those expelling kind of waves.
Yeah.
And I went so internal and just really envisaged or imagined what it looked like, and put all my energy down through my body. And I didn't have a lot of energy left at that point, but I gave it everything I had. And I remember hearing Desiree say, I think this baby's going to be out in the next 2 surges. And I went, fuck that. She's coming out this surge, because I wasn't going to muck around anymore with it. And I gave it heaps. And yeah, she came out in that surge. And I was just like, what? Like, because I was expecting her to crown and her head pop out, and then we have to wait and then go again. And it just all came out. She just came out. And then she sort of, I don't know, kind of went, I was sort of on my knees, and she went between my legs, and Desiree kind of scooped her.
Just guided her through your legs.
Yeah, guided her through and brought her up, and she had the cord wrapped around her neck, which again wasn't an issue. Nobody panicked. Everything just was fine and calm, wasn't it? Like, it was just, we were just trying not to dip it back into the pool water again. Because she'd sort of already opened her mouth a little bit and was gurgling.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, trying to get the cord unwrapped without dipping her back into the water. People were just trying to manage that because they're so slippery as well. But once we'd done that, she was in my arms, and Desiree was putting like a warm, wet towel on us to keep us warm, and it was just this flood of emotion. And we had this little baby, and she was perfect, and I felt nothing down there. It was all disappeared. The focus was just on this lovely little creature that I had just birthed, and there was tears, and Adam was crying, and she took her first little gurgly cry, and it wasn't much, but she was fine. She had perfect APGAR scores, and I didn't even think straight away to look and check what her sex was. We were just
that waited all there. That sort of was quite secondary, wasn't it?
Yeah, it didn't matter. And then I was like, oh, and then they were like, what is the baby? And I was like, oh, and then I thought to check, and initially I thought it was a boy, because everything's so swollen. And I was just like, oh yeah. And yeah. And then for the first time, I felt the cord of the placenta. I'd never felt an umbilical cord before. And Desiree was sort of saying, oh yeah, like, this is your umbilical cord and it feels funny, doesn't it? And then we were talking about that, and then all of a sudden I started getting some more contractions, more surges, and I was like, oh shit, the placenta. And yeah, before I knew it, I was birthing the placenta. It came out like 12 minutes after Lara, and it just came out in one push.
Yep.
And she picked it up in a bowl, and for the first time ever, I saw my placenta. So all these amazing little moments were like,
And there were some good moments with like Heidi.
yeah.
So she was sort of buzzing around the whole time, wasn't she?
Yeah.
In and out.
She came over to me at one point when I was really pushing. She made me a card saying, Mummy, I love you.
Oh.
She was holding it up in front of me, and I'm like, it's fine. It was hilarious at the time. Like, she was trying so hard to like communicate with me, and I was just not in it. Bless her little heart. But she wanted to be part of that birth, and I was so grateful she was there. Hayden was stashed away in his room, hiding from all the mooing and
the drama.
Yeah, and but she ran and got him when Lara was born, and they both came out, and it was such a beautiful moment of being able to share that with my kids, and for them to be able to see all these really lovely natural parts of a birth that they should be able to see, like looking at the placenta and watching me actually birth, and it just, none of it being panicked, or no horrible smells or drugs or needles or
Yeah, well, that was the other thing, wasn't it? So it was a lot of comments that I was making in messages to other guys, from work and friends, just saying that, like it was a home birth, and there was no assistance with any medication or drugs.
Yeah, no pain relief, no,
and
nothing.
It was always met with like shock. Yeah. And like
it's about drugs, guys. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It is a cool aspect of home birthing, right? Is that it's not just this incredible experience for you as a family, and changing the narrative for your children around what birth can be like, and
because that's now sorry, but like that's now normal.
Yeah, exactly. Right, so it's not just about your family, it's about all these people who you are going on to share this experience with, and there will be this like, it can be like that. You mean you don't have to go to hospital? You mean you don't have to have drugs? You mean you don't have to have vaginal examinations? You don't, like it's changing the story.
Yeah.
That it's undoing some of these conditioned beliefs we hold around birth when we share stories of positive and empowered birthing like this.
Yeah, and initially I think my mind was like, I don't want this to be the story for my daughters or daughter at the time, but it's become so much bigger than that. It's so much further reaching than that, and I plan on impacting a lot more people than just my daughters, and changing the story for a lot more people than that, because it's too important not to, share that.
what has it meant for you, Kiki? How has this whole experience changed you?
Well, I was thinking about this before we started this podcast, and your business, which is Healing Birth, like it has healed me. It's healed that wound in me. And even though I still get emotional about those two traumatic births, mainly the first one, I feel like I've found myself again, and I've changed that whole horrible experience for myself by doing this, and I've healed from it, from all the work that I did. I think even if I hadn't have achieved the home birth, or something had to happen and I had to transition to hospital, I still would have felt healed, because I worked on and leaned into and really dug deep and found all those little crevices filled with fear and distrust of myself and my body and my ability and all that suppressed instinctive knowing. Yeah, I found all of that and I regained it through all the work that I did, and and that to me is, yeah, so empowering and so priceless, and yeah, just changed the way that I feel about myself now as a woman and a birthing woman, and going forward into motherhood, even though I'm 42 now and I have a newborn, and I didn't imagine this for myself at this age. I now am stronger as a mother and as a woman than I've ever been in my entire life, because I can stand on my own 2 feet and use my voice now. And I've come out of this cloud of conditioning and being the good girl, and I can see clearly now. Yeah. And yeah, I'm so grateful that I did that. That was, yeah, I think that's been the most impactful thing for me, is finding my voice and my strength and my power. I knew it was in there, yeah, but I see it and I hear it and I feel it now. Yeah, I'm unleashed.
You're unleashed, and you want this for
Yeah,
there's other families out there. Do you have
desperately
a
so.
vision for like, I know you have an absolute fire in your belly
Yeah,
having come through this, and we were talking about this yesterday, this idea that you have of wanting to pay it forward. It's like, I've been privileged with having these amazing midwives and that working with me and standing by me, and I want to pay it forward. Yeah, what does that look like?
yeah, I desperately want to pay it forward. I like you say, I was really privileged, and I know that there's a lot of women out there, not just in New Zealand, but across the world, that are, really having to fight hard for something that they really shouldn't have to fight hard for. And we need to change the culture and change the way that midwifery is going. But not only that, but the way that we as women, as birthing women, are being treated like we're a vessel, and we're not. We're people, we have rights, we have a voice, but we're not using them. And it's slowly disintegrating to the point where birth has just become so over medicalized. We need to take it back, and so I'm kind of incensed and driven, and um, to to talk to women and get women seeing the power that they have within them, and the voice that they have within them, and that their voice matters and it should be heard. And it starts with, you know, finding these wise women midwives who really believe in that it's women-led care. It's the mother who makes the decisions. Nobody else gets to make those decisions. And finding those midwives and bringing us together alongside the women who want these empowered and positive births, and making a stand and taking it back from the system that is not working for us. It's working for itself. And really, you know, we need to take our power back. We're amazing beings and we bring life into the world, and without that, the world is screwed. So, you know, like, enough is enough. Like, we are too powerful to step back and let people walk all over us and medical births be the norm. It's just enough. This is what we're meant to do. This is what we're designed to do. This is what we've been created to do, and we need to take that back now. Yeah, it's gone too far in the other direction.
There's been a Facebook group started by you and Michelle, that, yeah, perhaps any listeners who feel similarly incensed or driven or just keen to get on board this taking our power back in birth, if they're interested in joining it. What's the name of the group? And I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, it's called the Wise Women Collective. And
Wise Women Network or Wise Women Collective?
I think it's the Wise Women Collective. I'll just check though. But it's equally for Wise Women. Oh, sorry, Wise Women Network. You're right. Wise Women Network NZ. It's equally for women that are pregnant or, you know, wanting to get pregnant and have another baby, who need support, who haven't been able to find it, who are wanting something that's a little bit outside of the norm, you know, a VBAC or you know, have a breech position baby, or GDM, like gestational diabetes, anything like that, anything big baby, and who wants support around that, because inherently, you know, that the birth that you want is actually, it's safe, and you just want some wise women to rally around you and support you. They can do that as well. So it's not just for this kind of movement that we're trying to start, but also for those going through the process as well, who need more than what they're currently getting. That's what we're here for. And yeah, it's a bloody cool organization that we're starting to gather in. These women collectively, their experience and their knowledge is just out of this world. Like, they are full of and crazy knowledge and experience. You know, it's just, yeah, if you got a question, they can answer it. But they're also incredibly reassuring as well, because, you know, you have those doubts of, oh, am I doing the right thing? And lo and behold, they will have an article, they will have evidence, they will have proof, they have data to back up, you know, what we know to be true, and instinctively, you know. But they're cool. They're very, very cool people and women. Yeah.
Beautiful. I think we need to wind this up and let you guys get to sleep. Little Lara has been out to it the whole time. I was thinking we might have got a shot. Oh, there she is. Look, beautiful girl.
You've been asleep the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Little angel.
Thank you both so much for doing this, coming on and sharing your story. I know this is your second podcast you've done now. You talked with the lovely Helen from Positive Births NZ. Is that her?
Yeah, that's her.
Yeah. And yeah, keep spreading the word, keep telling your workmates and your friends, Adam, you know, and Kiki, yeah, man, I'm so with you, you know I am, in terms of, yeah, like spreading the word, supporting others to stand in their power and birth, because it's so important.
It's super important. Yeah, thank you for having us, and thank you for all the support and love and, yeah, generosity and kindness that you've shown me. If it wasn't for you, I don't know how it would have gone, because you are the key player in me being able to achieve that, and having those women support me. It was vital. And so I'm eternally grateful to you.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's been an absolute gift coming. Our paths were meant to cross, Kiki.
100%. Yeah, yeah. And amazing things to come, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Beautiful. All right.
Thanks for having us.